make sure the audio's working. Hmm? Hmm? Oh, no. Just sit there and look pretty. Your words, not mine, homie. Yes. Lost that.
And she said, why is it not live? I said, they hadn't started yet,
That's
baby.
what I asked about, so she's not gonna make it tonight.
No, she's got Nate. They're doing bat time.
Can't compete with Nader Tater.
No, can't compete with Nate.
You got it pulled up?
Yep, go ahead and hop.
All right. Shalom. Anything?
It's live.
Hey, can we put that little cartoony face app?
Megan,
Good?
Can we put that little cartoony face app on your phone?
What cartoony face up?
You know, the one that changes your face to,
No. Phone. Okay. Okay. Hey, everybody. Happy Sunday. God bless y'all. Okay. Bear with me. I'm a little nervous about this one. It's pretty hefty. It's pretty dense, but in the best ways. We spent the last few weeks going over the Hall of Faith from Hebrews 11. That was a joy. And what we were doing was looking at these people within that hall of faith and doing pseudo character deep dives into every one of them, right? And God's always present in those, but we haven't really done a deep dive on God. And with the way everything is lining up time-wise, I think it worked out in such a way. Go figure, to where we can kind of continue on the same story path. We finished up with Exodus, or we finished up with Genesis, and obviously this is a big time of year for us as Christians, right? We've got Easter here, but it's also a big time of the year for the Jewish faith. Jesus was a Jew. He celebrated this time of year just like anyone else with the Passover. Exodus is a wonderful, wonderful book where you get to learn even more about God's character, and it's all stuff that he reveals himself, which I think is really, really interesting. So we are going to be in Exodus. If you want to go ahead and turn to a chapter or pull up your phone or what have you and go to one, you can go to Exodus 3. We're not going to jump straight into it, just want to go ahead and set the tone for what we're going to do tonight. So while y'all were doing that, I invite you to look up at the screen. And if you can't see it for anyone watching at home, it says God. And what I'd like to ask y'all is, what does that word mean to you? See, in our country, we live in a very religiously pluralistic society, meaning there's a lot of religions on tap and on offer. Christian faith, Islamic faith, Jewish faith, Hinduism, on and on and on it goes. We even have some faiths that aren't even really faiths, but it's things that people worship. Namely, we love to worship ourselves now, right? I saw this movie in 2016 where there's these two, I think they're supposed to be like Aztec deities or something, and the short of the long of it is they had been entrapped, and then they woke up in modern day society, and they're like, oh, these people just worship machines now. And I think that's part right, but we use the machines to worship ourselves. And that's like the whole story of the Bible, is man's constant struggle to put himself above God. On my high horse for a second. So with that being said, my argument is that this word God is the most mean nothing, watered down religious word in our language. And the reason being is, since we live in such a pluralistic society, a lot of folk who don't know any better tend to lump them all together, all the religions and all the deities of those religions and so on and so forth, right? So someone might say that they're being very open-minded when they say, well, they're all these people that practice religion, they're all striving towards a higher moral good, and they're just trying to do their thing, and, it's all the same thing, right? And that's actually the most closed-minded line of thinking you can actually have, because all us religious folk don't worship the same God and what have you, right? I'm still not going to knock those folk for doing that, but if you do run across someone who is like that, I would argue maybe try to smarten them up just a smidge, right? So, like I said, we're going to be in Exodus, so we're still in the Hebrew land, right? We're going to be talking about some Hebrew tonight. The Hebrew word for God is Elohim, and it gets used the exact same way in Hebrew as we use the word God in English. So there's God like this that you see on the screen where it's capitalized G, and that means God, our God, right? And then there's lowercase g, which is the God that those people I was telling you about that lump everything together. That's usually what they mean, lowercase g. If you don't believe me, look at anything in media, TV, music, on and on and on it goes. You can actually see it with the way you interact with folks. Sometimes I even do it. I'll say something to startle them, like, oh God. And I don't mean my God. I'm just reacting, and I'll say, oh God. So the word doesn't even necessarily mean anything. But they had a word for God just like we do, Elohim. And they had Elohim that meant small letter G, and they had Elohim that meant capital letter G-O-D. So God's got some other titles in these books. We're going to talk a little bit about them as they come across. And y'all pray for me because this is kind of lofty. So one of the last things that we looked at last week, we finished with the death of Joseph. And I told y'all if you had wanted to, you could look at the very next page where we're speaking about time and the way we as humans handle time, how Joseph had rescued this nation and kept everyone fed and healthy, but eventually this king comes along, or this Pharaoh comes along, who doesn't know Joseph. He doesn't care who Joseph is or what have you. We still do this today. You get enough time and distance on, let's just use like any national tragedy, for example, the more time and space gets put on, the less people care about it. That's why the Bible is true. That's one of the many apologetics for why the Bible is true. It's a story about how messed up people are and how we do this thing. 3,000 years on from, the writing of Exodus, we still do this same stuff. So, before we pick up, we're going to pick up right at the beginning of Exodus 3. But right at the end of Exodus 2, this king or this Pharaoh has passed away, and the people are crying out, like, God save us, we're enslaved, and we've got all this bad stuff happening. And then the scene ends, and we pick up in 3 with Moses. Now, I'm going to ask y'all, does anyone really need me to do a deep dive on Moses real quick in terms of his backstory? All right. So I am going to throw this one little hitch out there just because I think it's a neat tidbit. And I like to show how entrenched our culture is regarding the Bible. So I thought about being cute and doing it this way, but I'll just come straight out with it because I didn't want to sound too blasphemous. But the story of Moses as a baby is actually Superman's same origin story, if you think about it. In order to save his life, his parents put him in a vessel and ship him off, right? And then as he grows up, then he actually gets the Christ figure storyline. If you don't believe me, watch any Superman movie. There is some type of Christ reference in there, some way, shape, or form. Especially the last 3, which are the best 3. That's neither here nor there. But that's where we're picking up. So this king has died. It's still bad in Egypt. And, we're getting ready for something big to happen. And we cut to Moses. Moses has already ran away from Egypt at this point. He's gotten married. That's really about the gist of the context you'll need, okay? Now, Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. Excuse me. Ooh, liquid death. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Remember Horeb. Horeb is Mount Sinai. And not too much time from now, Moses is going to lead the people of Egypt, the slaves from Egypt, back to this mountain. This is where they get the 10 Commandments. This is where the golden calf incident goes down. It's a very important place within the Bible. All right, so Moses is out herding this flock around this mountain. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. And I invite y'all to look. Notice how Lord is spelled with all capital letters. So Lord, just the word Lord means like authoritative figure or what have you, right? When you see Lord all capitalized in the Bible, that is God's divine name. Now, his divine name has been in the Bible at this point. And if you read through Genesis, you'll see plenty of Lord with the capital spelling and what have you. And there's even people that have used it, but you don't really get a story of how they know the name or what have you. So Moses is about to learn a lot about God. And as the reader, you're going to get to learn about it the same way, right? And the divine name for God that the Hebrews used was Yahweh. I told y'all a few weeks ago, through translations, it ended up in English becoming Jehovah or what have you. That's just the way things turn out. I like to use, since we're doing Hebrew, we'll stick with Yahweh. And I'm going to try to throw these words in as we go, okay? So the angel of Yahweh appeared to him in a flame of fire that was in the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. So Moses is like, that's kind of strange. Let's go take a look at that. And when the Lord saw that he turned to see him, Elohim called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. We're picking up on this theme of how people respond when they're called. Here I am. And then he said, don't come near me. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place in which you are standing is holy ground. What's Moses been doing at this point? Herding sheep. What do you think he's been stepping in? Exactly. So God's like, hey, this is a big to do. Take the shoes off. You know, you're encountering a being that you have no idea what you're really encountering. This is a huge moment. And he said, I am the Elohim of your father, the Elohim of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at Elohim. That's fair. You know, as much as I love God and everything else, if I was ever put in a situation where I could come face to face with God, I'd probably panic and be like, no, I'm not worthy. I don't want to see, you know. And then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people and their suffering, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians, to bring them out of the land to a land good and broad, flowing with milk and honey, to a place of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. You read this enough, you get good at linking those all together. Jason knows what I'm talking about. So, God has seen the oppression of these people, right? So we're learning something about God as we go along. God is watching image-bearing creatures suffer at the hands of other image-bearing creatures, and he doesn't like it. That's when he decides he's going to start to act, on top of the covenantal promise that we've been talking about for the last few weeks. Oh, and the whole milk and honey thing. What makes milk? Cows, goats. What makes honey? Bees. So he's saying we're going to go to this land that is rich with livestock and everything you need. You almost don't even have to cultivate the land. And interesting enough, from everything I've learned, it's still that way there today. Everything that grows there apparently is just amazing. Never ate anything from there, but I surely want to, but I just think that that's neat. It's like, go figure. All right. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring the people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. So God's getting fired up, and he's like, I've seen this suffering, and I'm about to do something about it. And we're all like, as we're in, like, yeah, we're going to do something about it. And Moses is probably feeling the same way, and God says, I'm going to send you. And Moses is going to be like, really? Why? I don't really want to. He fusses a lot about it and what have you, right? Because when we think about it, that's not the way we want God to work in the world. Like, if it was up to us, like, yeah, or just like, can't you do it? But if you read the Bible, that's not how God really ever does it. Really, he will always use an image bearer to do his work. And it's usually going to be the least suspecting out of any of them, right? Moses is the same way. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? So even Moses picked up on this, like, I'm nobody. Why should I go? But he said, this is God, but I will be with you. And this shall be the sign for you, that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, they shall serve me on this mountain. Two things. What's the line that everyone likes to quote from Moses? Let my people go, right? Exactly. But that's actually not the whole line. It's let my people go so that they may worship in the desert. There's worship tied to that line, and we've cut that out for some reason in our society. But notice that God says, I will be with you. This isn't the first time in the Bible that he has said, I will be with someone. But this is extremely important because the Hebrew that is used for I will be is ehweh. That kind of sounds very similar to God's divine name, Yahweh. Keep that in mind. So he says, ehweh be with you, right? And then Moses said to God, or said to Elohim, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the Elohim of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And Elohim said to Moses, I am who I am. Does anyone have a different translation there other than I am who I am? Same. What about you, Paul?
I am that I am.
I am that I am. All right. So there's different translations that can be used here, right? And they're actually all accurate. I've got 4 right here. I am what I am. I am who I am. I will be what I will be. And I will be who I will be. So remember just a little bit ago, I said when God tells Moses that I will be with you, he says ehweh in Hebrew. Well, when he goes to give him this name in the Hebrew, it's that word again. It's ehweh. So why does that cause this translation where you get all these different scenarios, right? Well, there's no present tense for the verb to be in Hebrew. In other words, there's no word for am, is, or are. So in English, I would say, I am Lee. But in Hebrew, it would be closer to say, I Lee. That's just the nature of it. And Hebrew is not the only language that does this. Arabic and Russian are among the other languages that do this, right? So here, when God uses the future tense of the verb to be, it literally means I will be. But it is often translated as I am because there is no present tense. So think about what he's saying when he says, I will be with you. And Moses is like, well, who shall I say sent me? And God says, ehweh esher esweh. Ehweh esher ehweh. So again, I will be what I will be, or so on and so forth. But that causes some trouble to our ears if you think about it, right? So you're like, what do you mean you will be? And when you said you will be with me, do you mean like right now, or do you mean later when I go? Right? Because that's how our minds work. Well, what exactly do you mean by that? So what does God mean when he says, ehweh esher ehweh? What God is saying is, whatever I am that. And we're going to really dive into that here in a little bit because there's a passage with Moses where God gives his characteristics. So be thinking about that. So God is telling him, whatever I am that. All right, but you can't go to the Egyptians and say, I am has sent me, right? I can't take a message from my boss to a peer of hers on the other side of the office and be like, I am told me to come over here, right? Because they're going to be like, who's you? You mean you came over here? There's like, what does all that even mean, right? So the response is really for Moses when he says that, right? And keep this in mind too. He says it for Moses, but he also says it for everyone who is ever going to read these words ever, right? So God's response is not only for Moses, it is also for us who are reading this thousands of years later, right? It's important to remember that the Bible has the almost impossible task of being relevant to slaves living in the Bronze Age, to us in our time now, and to our descendants. And I would actually argue it's done a bang-up job. And the fact that it has succeeded in doing so is another reason why I believe that the Bible is true. But anyway, he still can't go to these people and say, I am has sent you. So let's read a little bit more, right? Where was let's see. 15, thank you. These little texts, I need a bigger font. Elohim said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the Elohim of your fathers, the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. Thus, I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, Yahweh, the Elohim of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me saying this. Right? So there's that double emphasis, right? He tells him to do the same thing again. So what does Yahweh mean? So Yahweh, it's pronounced Yahweh because the way the Hebrew is translated, the only way it can really be spelled out in English is Hywy. Just is what it is, right? So what does that tell us? What does that tell us along with the Ehweh? Because they actually share the same letters, both these words, the I will be and the divine name. So what God is saying is, He is essence. The word Yahweh tells us that the essence of God is being. And this is that thing that made me nervous about how am I going to explain this. And that really, I think this quote's just the best thing I can do. God simply cannot be explained any further. Anything else reduces the meaning. God simply is. That's heavy and deep. That's things we can't even really get our minds around. When people ask all these questions to me about, well, how does this work and how does that work? And really what they're asking is for like metaphysics, things I can't explain, right? Well, who created God? And on and on and on and on it goes. I've literally gotten to a point where I don't even like having those conversations because I think about this. How am I supposed to explain that? That's the point, right? What do we know about God in the story so far? He is the creator. When he says he will be with you, he will be with you. So when he says I will be and I am that, all that stuff, he will be. That's his thing. That's what he is going to do, right? So, okay. So what? God is what he is. He is essence. He is being. And that's what he's getting at. But what does that mean? Well, God actually in the same book does list his characterizations. If you would, turn to Exodus 34. I'm borrowing Diana's Bible, and I have a hard time flipping through it. So y'all might actually get there before me. And we're only going to look at 2 verses. It's going to be verses 6 and 7, I believe. Yes, 6 and 7. So y'all know me, I'm context guy, so I like to tell y'all what's going on. This event that these 2 verses are taking place during is immediately after the golden calf incident. So no sooner does Yahweh get his people out of Israel and out of the hands of slavery and start a covenant with them, they literally mess it up as they're having the feast of the covenant. So they're literally breaking the covenant as Moses is trying to get the tablets made, right? That's what's going down. Moses has just talked God out of rebooting the whole thing, right? And they've kind of had it out. Moses has been wrestling with God on top of this mountain, right? He reasons with God, and God's like, okay, well then we'll do this. And just because I'm such a Bible nerd, there's actually, let's see, right at the very beginning of 34, God tells Moses, cut for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first, right? That's in my translation. Because he's telling him you're going to recut these tablets, but really he's like, go cut 2 tablets like the first that you broke. Because God didn't tell him to throw the tablets, right? I just like to point this nerdy Bible stuff out. I like it when God throws a little sass in there. You know what I mean? He's like, by the way, you broke those. I didn't tell you to do that. I understand your frustration, but if you hadn't have done it, you'd still have them, so have fun cutting them out, right? So he tells him to do this. Moses is going to do it, but Moses asks him, like, I want to see your glory. That's the word that's actually used here. There's this big debate about, how does God take form? And the big argument, especially around Jesus, was can God take the form of man? And on it goes. But he's actually done it a few times in Genesis already. But Moses doesn't ask him to let him see him. He says, I want to see your glory. So that being, that essence, that, Ehwe, whatever that is, Moses is asking to see that. And God's like, you can't. Not to the full extent, right? Or else at least you be destroyed. So he's like, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to work it out where you can see a little bit of it, right? Enough to where it won't kill you. So that's where we're going to pick up at 6. This is him coming in. Actually, we'll do 5. Yahweh descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of Yahweh. Yahweh passed before him and proclaimed, Yahweh, Yahweh, Elohim, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving the iniquities and transgressions and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation. So view that in context of what we talked about in Exodus 3. Whatever God is, that's what he is, that being, that essence, that whatever. And here God is saying that he is mercy and he is gracious. He is mercy, he is grace. He is these things. So let me ask you this real quick. There's all kinds of different ways we could look at this. You could look at it as like your best friend, your covenantal partner, your wife, or what have you. I want to use role model for this. So think of a role model that you've had in your life. And when you have that role model, you look at those good qualities, right? Whatever that may be. You look at that and they're like, yeah, that's what I like about them. So let's just say it's bravery, right? This person is brave. But are they brave all the time? Are they brave to the core, right? And that's where we get bummed out a lot, because what's that saying, like, no one never meet your heroes, right? Because like you have this expectation and then they're not that thing that you thought they were. Right, and then you can even still break that down. We'll go through some of these. You meet someone and they're like your best friend. And you love them. You're like, man, I like so-and-so. He's funny. He's kind. So on and so forth. You know what? I need a roommate. We should be roommates. Right? And you quickly find out that those people are not, like, the character traits that you like about them, that's not who they are. It's a snippet of who they are, but it's not their being. It's not what makes them top to bottom, right? Same can be said for marriage. I would say I thought about using me and Diana as an example because that's just what we do, but she kind of got me on the first bounce. She knew my character defaults, but she loved me anyway. Right? No, I'll take it. That's love right there. So, see, all these years later, nothing's changed. That's why I didn't use that as an example. But y'all get the other thing, right? These other examples. So you meet these people and they don't always live up to the character traits that you give them and their good qualities and what have you. So with God says, I am this being. Whatever I am that. So what is he? He's mercy. He's grace. He's patient because he's slow to anger. Remember when he had that covenantal promise with Abraham, where they actually did the covenant, where he walked through the aisle by himself, and Abraham has that vision, and he says, look, you're going to die at a good old age, but your offspring will be slaves in a foreign land. But I will rescue them because the time for the people that are living in this land, their sin hasn't basically topped out yet. He's slow to anger, so he's given these people that were, we talked about some of the horrible things that they did in that country with Moloch and sacrificing children and what have you, but he still gave them time to come around, right? So let's reread these characteristics again. I'm going to have to get bigger font. So he's mercy, he's grace, he's patient because he's slow to anger. He overflows with love and faithfulness. God is love. We love to say that, right? People will throw that phrase. That's one of those, like I was saying. If God is the most watered down religious word out there, God is love is the most watered down phrase. Because no one really knows what that means. Or they do the thing where they make it mean what they want it to mean. I'm not going to put God in that kind of box. I prefer to take him at his own word. And this is literally him. He gives his divine name, what that means, and his own characteristics. Who am I to add or take away from that? Who is anyone else to add or take away from that? Whew. So he's love and he's faithfulness, and we've seen this already. We're in Exodus, but he loves these image-bearing creatures so much that he made them like himself. He's faithful because he was with Abraham. He's there with Moses now getting ready to do this covenantal promise that he made with some old guy who wouldn't even really listen to him and do all the things he asked him to do in the first place. But he's still here. He's still doing his thing. Keeping steadfast loves for thousands. He will love you for thousands of years and generations, and he will forgive this iniquity and transgression and sin. This is the part that usually makes people a little uncomfortable with this passage. But who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generations. So this is one of those things, people hear that and they're like, does that mean like if I get punished, he's going to punish my kids and then my kids' kids and on and on and on it goes, because it mentions this third and fourth generation and on and on and on it goes. That's actually not the case whatsoever. Your sin has consequences, whether God actually punishes you or not. But your sin has consequences, and those consequences ripple. It's like throwing a pebble in the lake, right? So if I go out one night and I do something horrible, like drink and drive, and then I get someone killed, what's that ripple like? What is the cost of that sin? I've ended a life, first and foremost, of another image-bearing creature. I've ruined my life. I've ruined the life of Diana and Nate, and whomever I killed, I've ruined their lives too. And that ripples through the generations. That's what he's getting at here. Your sin will have consequences that ripple through. Your children are going to remember your sin, and they might even follow through in it. It's just, we see it a lot nowadays, this unending cycle of people not being able to pull themselves out of a bad situation. I'll give you a snippet of a personal story. I was raised by my grandmother. It wasn't in the best of upbringing. She did the best she could, but like anyone else, she had good and negative character qualities, right? And her and a lot of other people that I lived around kind of just never seemed to want to do any better than what they had, right? And bad behavior creates more bad behavior, right? And I was surrounded with it. And at one point, here's what we do. We're talking about God and the way we want God to act, like when we were in chapter 3, when God says, I'm going to come down and save the day, and we're like, yeah, he's going to do it. But he's not going to do it in the way you want him to do it. He's going to use you. So you got to pull yourself through God. You're not going to do it on your own. But you put God at the center of your life and get yourself out of those situations. So when God said, now notice, he said he would love for thousands, right? We like to overlook that part. You keep doing what you're doing and do like he told Abraham to do. Teach your kids to obey God, fear God, keep his commandments, and on and on. He'll love you for thousands. But if you mess up, that sin's going to reverberate through time and your offspring and so on and so forth. But he's saying here, that doesn't mean he gives up on you either. He's not abandoning you completely. He's still going to be with those people that have been affected by your sin. And it's up to them whether or not they're going to keep that chain going or break it and turn to God. But no matter what, God, he will be with you, right? How are we doing? It's a lot to take in, but I like framing God this way, because we're so bad about making God out to be like the cosmic genie. That's like my favorite phrase for him. We're like, he's just going to do what I ask him to do, right? And that's like, read your Bible. That's not how God works. He wants you to have a relationship. He wants you to be active and so on and so forth. And you're made in his image, right? You have the same potential. So why not strive to be like that? Are you going to succeed at every turn? Of course not, right? We've talked about conquering sin. You can conquer your sin, and you can remember God's characteristics and his essence, right? You can do this. You can be better than what you are. Let's see. We'll go ahead. All right. So this I am statement's a big to-do. The I am statement and the characteristics that are given. Actually, the characteristics that are given are repeat the whole merciful and slow to anger and on and on and on it goes. That phrase gets used like 20 more times in the Old Testament. So the Hebrews picked up on this. Like, okay, the Elohim of surrounding areas, they're wrathful and vengeful, and they just flat out don't like humans, right? But our God, he ain't like that. We actually know what he's like because he told us. All right, so they pick up on that, and that becomes a big, big, big deal to them. So much so that it becomes a prayer. So flip over to Deuteronomy. Everyone's favorite book of the Torah, right? So Deuteronomy chapter 6. Yes. And just because I'm a Bible nerd, I'll throw this out there. Deuteronomy might be one of my favorite books in the Bible. It is absolutely beautiful. Just for one of the passages that we're going to read. All right, so Deuteronomy 6, we're going to start at verse 4. So again, context. So the Hebrews are getting ready to go into the promised land, this land flowing with milk and honey, right? And Deuteronomy is like a prayer / pep talk. Moses is getting ready to go up on this mountain to die. He knows that the people of Israel are probably going to start out okay, but they're going to self-destruct just like anyone else. God could have picked any people group, and it would have had the exact same result. We are what we are. If God is what he is, we are what we are. We're broken, right? So anyway, this whole nature of God became such a big deal that the Hebrews actually turned this into a prayer to illustrate God, his character, and his whole divineness. So it's Deuteronomy 6, Verse 4, and I thought it was there. Here we go. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, or Yahweh our Elohim, Yahweh is one. You shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. So, what's going on here? These folk are about to go into this land. Do the people that live in this land worship Yahweh? No. Their society is actually a lot like ours. There are plenty of Elohim on tap. And you can pick and choose or whatever, right? Again, not unlike ours. But Moses telling them, like, look, Yahweh is one. He's not like these other gods. He doesn't even bother to have the argument about whether they're real or not, or on and on and on and on and on it goes. Because that's what we like to do, right? You know, we want to be like, no, my God's more real than your God, and blah, 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 blah. Well, if your God is the essence of being, why even bother? That's not to say don't defend him, but why go down that rabbit hole? But anyway, so this becomes a prayer, right? Jesus would have said this prayer. Paul says this prayer. Hint, hint, we might be turning to Paul here in a second, right? So this divine nature of God is a big, big, big to do. He's one, he is being, he is. Like he said, I am. Flash forward about 1,000 years or so. We have this carpenter from first century Palestine come along who claims to be God incarnate, right? And in John, he says, I am 7 times. I'm just going to read them. I'm not going to give you the bit or what have you. It says, I am the bread of life. I am the light I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the vine. So if God is the essence of being, Jesus comes along and he's like, I am. And notice life gets mentioned a few times in here, right? So Jesus is life. If Jesus is Yahweh become human, that means he is also the characteristics of God become human. There are so many times in all 4 Gospels where it mentions Jesus being moved with compassion, right? To the point of tears even, right? So think about, like, I'm fairly compassionate. I'm not compassionate all the time. Like I was talking about earlier with your role models and your friends. We're the same way as individuals. I'm fairly compassionate. I'm not compassionate all the time. I'm certainly nowhere near close to slow to anger. Jesus is super patient, right? I saw how you looked over there. She's not either. She's more patient than I am, though. But anyway, so Jesus is like living up to this being the embodiment of Yahweh, right? And even his name, just like with Jehovah, Jesus' name wasn't actually Jesus. There was no J in Hebrew either, since we're talking about how the Hebrew language works. Think about it. I can't even imagine not being able to use a J. That doesn't even work for me. But Jesus' name was Yeshua. So all these names mean something, right? Yeshua means God with us. God takes on human flesh. He is the embodiment of all these characteristics. He is the essence of being, and he's with us. He is walking around with us. I'm sorry, I thought you was trying to say something. But he is the characteristics of this. That's a big to-do, right? That's something really profound. I'm not trying to barrel through this too hard, but I mean, like, I actually would challenge y'all to reflect on this for a spell, right? As the week goes over. I mean, that's the first time I read this, it broke my categories. See, I'd read the Gospels first, and I was like, I love this, but I can tell I got to go back and reread this stuff that comes earlier because it's filled with it. So I actually read Exodus first for whatever reason, because that was the first commentary I got. So I get to chapter 3, and it explains the whole essence of being. I'm like, oh, I'd never I had always done the typical American thing. You know, God's omnipotent and on and on and on it goes, but he's like a cosmic genie. It's like, oh, well, all this other stuff that I've ever had questions about doesn't really mean that much to me now. I don't care how it works. I just know that it works. And that's enough for me. And that I know what God's characteristics are, and they're wonderful. And I know that when he says he's with me, he's with me. And I don't even have to second guess it because it's in his nature. It's literally what he is. I can live with that, right? Now, we were talking about religious pluralism and how there's all these religions on tap. These people, this passage that we just read from Moses, before these people go in, they live in a land just like ours, where you've got all these different gods to choose from. And I was talking about how, people like to lump all this in where it's just whatever that is, right? Whatever. And we do worship God, Yahweh, but we don't worship God, Yahweh, like the Jews worship God, Yahweh. We worship Yeshua, Jesus. We worship God through Jesus, right? Now it's starting to get a little dense. I'm going to leave y'all with this. If you would, flip to 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Had to get some New Testament in here, right? It's kind of the whole point of what we do, right? All right. So again, context. I'm a big context guy. Okay. Corinth, this church that Paul is writing to, it's in this town called Corinth. Corinth is like the Las Vegas of the ancient world. There was even a phrase that wasn't too unsimilar to the whole, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas thing, right? I'm trying to remember what it was, but it's something along the lines of to be a Corinthian or something like that, meaning it's the same thing for Vegas. It's debauchery and hedonism and on and on and on and on and on it goes. So Paul goes to this place and he sets up this church and everything's good, but all this heresy starts to bleed into the church. The city of Corinth had the same type of pluralism that we do. It's in a Roman city. There are plenty of gods on offer, right? So Paul's got to snatch a knot in these guys. Now remember, Paul is Jewish. He grew up saying the Deuteronomy prayer. It's called the Shema. So Paul grew up saying that every day. The Jews would still do. They say it every day. It's a good prayer. Spoiler alert, that's what we're going to wrap up with tonight. Why wouldn't we, right? So anyway, so look at this. So Paul is writing these people, and let's see. Here we go. So 8. Now he's bickering he's telling these people how to live and try to act right, not to listen to these other folks, right? So we're going to start at 5. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 5. For although there may be many so-called Elohim in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many Elohim and many lords, yet for us there is one Elohim, the Father, that's Yahweh, from whom are all things and from whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things are all things, and through whom we exist. It doesn't pick up as much in the English translation, but what Paul just did was put Jesus in that prayer from Deuteronomy. That makes my hair stand up. I think that's so cool, right? This was a devout Jew. If he didn't believe what he saw, if he didn't believe the things that he had talked about with the other apostles and what have you, there is no way. He still worships Yahweh. He just worships Yahweh through Jesus now, right? So he's a Bible scholar. I think that's why God reached out to Paul the way he did. Think about all the other disciples. They're everyday people. These people weren't Bible scholars. They knew their Bible, but they didn't think about theology and this, that, and the other. And that's where Paul comes in. And Paul gets it. Paul has this experience. He goes to Saudi Arabia for 3 years, probably reads the Bible, or his Bible nonstop, and he puts it all together. So for him to put Jesus in this prayer, that's a big deal. There is no Trinity in the Bible. But you get this. It's one of those things where you don't need it. That's just what we figured. That's the way we had to figure it out after the fact. So is Jesus God, or is God Jesus, and on and on and on it goes. So which is it? And Paul says, yes. Right? And I think that's so neat. I think that's so beautiful and profound. And to think that at some point in time, someone actually walked the earth that actually was the embodiment of these characteristics. Man, that's so cool, right? And it's profound, and it's beautiful, and it helps me relate to my God more, and on and on and on it goes. So that's about the gist of what I have for y'all. Again, think on this, reflect on this. When the first time I read this in a commentary, it blew my mind, and then I watched a sermon/lecture on it, and that blew my mind some more. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is like, again, the whole metaphysics argument seems stupid now. I don't even think these things, like who's God, or like we even like to throw out the whole, he is the, what is it, the uncaused cause, or so on and so forth. It's like, that's just fancy words of saying I don't know, or fancy ways of saying I don't know. This better just be like, whatever God is, that is God, he is being. And he tells you what he is too. And if you don't believe that, read the New Testament and read how Jesus lived his life. Guess what? That's how we're supposed to live our life. So when Paul says these things about how God is one, is the Father Yahweh, and Jesus is Lord, this is new creation starting to bleed into the world now. So Jesus is the embodiment of this, and he lived a life in such a way that we as his followers should try to emulate. We're image bearers, right? God never wanted us to make images of him because we are the images. And we should act like it. And we should treat other people like it, even when we don't want to. So all that is to say, let's wrap this puppy up. And again, I say we just do the Shema prayer. I love that prayer. I think it's beautiful. So let's do it. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk to them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And all God's people said, amen. All right, love y'all. God bless y'all. If y'all want to talk theology, I'm right here.
Good stuff.
And I love